All right, we're on holding by Pirke Avos, ethics of our fathers, as is known. Again, we're on holding by Pirke Avos, ethics of our fathers, as it is known. We are in chapter 2. We are in the 60th Mishnah, right? It's part 24, I think 25, whatever it is. So again, want to work on holding by Pirke Avos, ethics of our fathers. We are in chapter 2, Mishnah 16. This is part 24, and we're still on the first part of the Mishnah, where Rabbi Yeshua says, an evil eye, evil inclination, and hatred of other people remove a person from this world. So again, we're speaking about the evil eye, and we're speaking about the last number of weeks, Rabbeinu Yonah, and Rabbeinu Yonah learns, as we've said before, Rabbeinu Yonah learns that, what are we talking about? We are talking about person not happy with what they have, right? Their friend is wealthier, as, I don't know, seems to have better kids, seems to have better spouse, better house, better job, all kinds of things, makes a person jealous, causes damage to them, to the friends as well, because they're going to say things, cause other people damage. And basically it's going to contaminate their thoughts. And basically it comes out that they're jealous of things that they don't have. Right, again, and it can basically destroy a person, and a person's going to say, well, life's not fair, right? Life, is just, it's not fair. The way things are. I deserve this. I deserve that. I deserve the other thing, right? So basically, there's an issue with a person's emunah. Now, in the generation before the Messiah comes, right? Which is this generation. Everyone agrees we're living in the generation of the coming of the Messiah. So with that, what is the biggest test? What is the biggest test going to be? The biggest test is going to be emunah, right? That is going to be the biggest test. And we see that in this generation, that's exactly the case, right? And the reason, we see a lot of things we don't understand, a lot of things that don't make a lot of sense. So because of that, we're going to question, or a person may question, why didn't this go my way? Why didn't that go my way? Why, fill in the blank, right? Any number of things that we see in our own lives, a person can complain. They can say, I don't have this, or I don't have that, or I'm missing something, or who knows what, right? But at the end of the day, the lack is where? The lack is in them, is in themselves. Now, but the problem is that there are a lot of things that we're not going to understand, right? They're not, going to make sense. So in the secular world, the person would say, what would they say? Well, you just have to believe. You have you have to have faith, so to speak. So we certainly believe, beyond the shadow of a doubt, first, the first command of the 10 Commandments, Exodus chapter 20, verse 2, I am the Lord your God, says God himself, Anochi Hashem Elokecho, I am the Lord your God, took you out of the house of bondage, of the house of slavery, right? So we understand that is a mitzvah. As the Chinuch says, it goes through every mitzvah and every parsha. And the Sefer Chinuch says over there, that's the mitzvah, belief in God. Very good. But he says, what does it mean to believe in God? Right? A lot of people claim, they believe in God, right? No atheist in a foxhole. So when I was going to rabbinical school in New York, I was interviewed by a local paper, and one of my quotes was, I actually got it right, that a lot of people say they believe in God, and I think that's a bunch of garbage, which that is exactly what I said, and I'll still hold to it today, because what does belief in God mean? So you might say, well, minimal level is belief in supernatural, that there's someone above them, someone seemingly controlling the show, right? The question is, how do they view God? That's, before we get into definitions, right? How are they viewing God? Does God have a personal connection to us? Doesn't matter, right? It's enough just to believe. And if I do believe, what are my obligations, right? If a person just believes, then what happens? So you say, okay, so they believe there's a supernatural power. Now, atheists or people of Amalek don't believe in anything supernatural, right? That's what Amalek brought to the world, even though we don't necessarily know who Amalek is today, right? Nonetheless, they brought atheism to the world. So a lot of people, they say, come on, all these antiquated laws, all these things, God makes a command. God makes a command, to King Saul to wipe out Amalek, says the book of Samuel 1, chapter 15. It was a whole chapter of wiping out Amalek, right? Men, women, children, didn't matter. You wipe them all out. So people say, oh, that's cruel, whatever. You'll say, well, we don't know what Amalek is today, so how can we do it? Very good. Just came before Purim, and there's a mitzvah on Shabbos to hear these words, right? To wipe out Amalek. So technically, we don't really know who they are, right? So many say that the Germans, Yimach Shemam Zichron, during the war, part of Amalek. We're part of them, and their cruelty and everything else. But what did they bring to the world? Right? That is the question. What did they bring to the world? So they brought to the world beyond the shadow of a doubt, they brought to the world what? Doubt. That's what they brought. They brought doubt to the world, right? Doubt and what do you call it? If you look at the numerical value in Gematria, right? Every letter has numerical value. So Aleph is 1, Beis is 2, Gimel is 3, right, etc. So basically, what do I have? That the numerical value of Amalek is the same as Safek, right? Is the same, right? Is the same as doubt. So what did Amalek bring into the world? Thousands of years ago, there was this group. There's a group of people called Amalek. We don't know who they are today. Come on, what relevance is it? They brought doubt to the world. And what is doubt? Doubt of supernatural, right? Now, Amalek doesn't believe in supernatural, yeah, but they brought that to the world, right? That's exactly what got Haman killed, as it's being pinned down on Esther's couch, right? And Achashverosh says, you scoundrel, you're going to take my wife in front of my face. And God opens his eyes, the Gemara says, and sees pinned down by angels. And that's the end, right? Because he can't say, well, there are angels pinning me down. What would Achashverosh tell him? He says, you're Amalek. He said, if you're Amalek, that's it. So you don't believe in supernatural, right? You never believe in supernatural, right? And all that. Very good. Now, so that's what they brought, to the world, and we live in a world of tremendous cynicism, right? And even though, right, there will be now we'll get some definitions here. Even though people will say, "I believe in God," what does that mean? Are they just saying, "I believe in a supernatural power"? Are they saying, again, at what level does God intervene in history? Am I supposed to serve him? How am I supposed to serve him? So acknowledgement, the first of the 13 principles of faith of the Rambam, of Maimonides. It is the first of the 13 principles. And that God's absolute. There are no other gods, right? Also, beginning of the 10 Commandments, there are no other gods. Don't place any other gods before you, right? Again, against the command, against the idea of idolatry, which unfortunately, is alive and well. Regardless of that, so most of the world, I saw my Q&A last week, most of the known world is involved in idolatry, right? You got about, let's say, according to the stats, let's say about 8 billion people in the world, right? Between, but besides the Christians and the Muslims, right, together make more than 4.5 million, or almost maybe 5 million, right, in the world. So that's already the majority. So majority of the world, as we know it today, are steeped in idolatry. Now, some more, some less, some maybe doing customs of what their fathers did, whether they really believe in it, they don't believe in it, doesn't matter. But essentially it's idolatry, right? So they're caught up, totally caught up, in idolatry. Now, obviously, God gives us free will, gives us ability to make decisions, but it is kind of mind-boggling that you have, a huge amount of people in the world that are going obviously down the wrong path, as we understand. Right now, someone told me, they said, it's not fair. All these, all these Hindus, again, more than 1 billion people or something like that, that are worshiping cows, and it's not their fault. Okay, whose fault is it? A person grew up in communist China, right? Be waving the red flag, right? Be waving Mao's flag. Grew up in Russia, you'd be you'd be a communist, be an atheist. Yeah, very good. Isn't it possible people can get out of it? People can think there's something more to life, right? They can get out of it. Get contacted by people from India all the time, right? So a person, if they want to, they can get out of it. Says the Gemara, you want to go on the right path, God will help you. You want to go on the wrong path, He won't stop you. Okay. Now, does God want, all the people to be wiped out? No. But He gives everyone free choice, right? And this is something obvious. How can it be? If the Torah says at the very beginning, Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, God created the heaven and the earth. What was before that? It was God. Right now, it doesn't say that He was the first, because if it was the first, then maybe there's something before Him, right? As Chosavov says at the beginning, in the gate of God's unity, or it's very hard gate to go through. A lot of people skip it, but it's basically proof for A, for God's existence, and B, that there's only one God, and the fact that He's absolute. But even so, in this world, morality is relative. A lot of people believe in humanism, secularism, right, or moral relativism, right? Meaning, again, morality is relative. So, euthanasia is not murder, right? It's relative. Why, a person suffering, we're putting them out of our misery or out of their own misery. We don't want to see them suffer. So people have good hearts, right? They definitely have good hearts. They don't want to see someone suffer. Makes sense, right? Right? Totally makes sense. Totally makes sense. That should be the case. But again, what's the bottom line, right? What's the bottom line? That the whole world, is basically, brainwashed, right? And that, I came to that conclusion my late teens, my early 20s, which, obviously, if I had a proper Torah education growing up, would have come to that conclusion a lot earlier. But okay, right? But most people don't think, right? Someone who mentions that, yeah, a lot of people were raised by wolves, okay, right? Live in a crazy culture that's basically brainwashed people. People, will claim we've been brainwashed, but that's okay. A little bit of brainwashing is good. So I would tell you, so I would say the first thing is to understand, okay, there's a God, right? And that's very easy to prove, right? That there is supernatural. Now, the question would be, divine providence. Divine providence, how it works, right? So for a non-Jew, no obligation to believe in divine providence. I think it's a good thing. Definitely think it's a good thing for them to believe. But where do we see divine providence in the Torah? Where do we see that clear as day? We see that by, again, Exodus chapter 20, verse 2. Same thing. Same verse we just quoted. Because it says, Anochi Hashem Elokecho, I am the Lord your God. How do you know? How do you know I'm the Lord your God, says God himself, because I took you out of Egypt. I took you out of the house of bondage. Very good. Very good. He took us out of the house of bondage. Okay. Now, there's an obvious question. Commentaries ask, why does it not say that he took us out of, created the world? Wouldn't that be greater? God's going to declare himself to be king of the world, and that he is the Lord your God, because he created the world. Very good. Only one problem. Who was there at creation? Nobody. Except for God. God was there. So here you have 600,000 men between the ages of 20 and 60, not including women and children. It's about 2 to 3 million people, right? That witnessed God at Mount Sinai. Now, no other so-called religion ever made such a claim, and no other religion ever will make such a claim that God revealed himself to a whole nation. So very good. So God reveals himself to the whole nation and gives them a whole set of commandments, a whole set of things that we have to do, pass it down to Moses, Moses passes it down to us. Right? Now, understanding that there's one God. Yeah, a lot of idolatry out there, but okay. Right? It says the Rambam and others make very clear there's one God. Okay. Now, understanding that there's one God, God doesn't change. The values don't change. In other words, to always say murder is going to be forbidden or any other thing has to be that it doesn't change. It has definitions. Things don't change generation after generation, right? Yeah, one thing I kept hearing over and over and over again ad nauseum, right, from the conservative movement is times change. Yeah, that means absolutely zero, right? So what? Times change. So 500 years ago, is the Torah the same? Torah's the same, right? In 2 weeks, come Passover. Even, thousands of years ago, you go to any Jewish community, the 15th of Nisan, everybody is eating matzah, right? You're going to have 3 matzahs. You're going to have 4 cups of wine, a 5th cup for Elijah, right? You're going to have bitter herbs, depending where you're from, right? You're going to have charoset. You're going to have everything that everyone else does. Now, it might be a little bit more watered down, depending on how much you go through and what you do, whatever. But everyone's going to be doing the same thing. Everyone's more or less going to be doing the same thing. Now, so if that's the case, so what's changed? Right? What exactly has changed? We don't eat 3 matzahs. We don't have 3 matzahs anymore. At the Seder, I don't have to eat the same amounts. Every year. Where did it get watered down? Where did it change? Right? Up until 250 years ago, give or take, everybody was Orthodox. Right? So what happened? So as my Rebbe would say, rabbis lost power. They took away power. Right? They took away power. Communities did whatever they wanted, and things got very diluted. Yeah, the conservative reform movement only, 100 years old, 20 years old, 30 years old, whatever, whatever it is, right? But the proof and the onus is on them that they have an obligation to show where the Torah changed, where God came about, where God came and he said that the Torah changed, that we can do what we want. Or, God forbid, that we don't have to listen, right? Or that we don't have to listen. Where does it say that? Now, the Reform movement started out differently than the conservative movement. Their goal was what? To uproot Torah. That was their goal. 100% that was their goal. Now, the conservative movement started out Orthodox, and you had a lot of Orthodox rabbis there. Their goal was to preserve Judaism, but make it more, make it better for the coming generation, to make it more meaningful. Now, at some point, they veered off being a halachic movement, being a movement based in Jewish law. Once they did that, they lost all credibility. But okay, the prayer service is in Hebrew, right? A lot of synagogues, part of the conservative movement, the prayer service is in Hebrew. whatever. But again, even so, they're not that far behind Reform. The joke is that like they were 10 years behind Reform. Modern Orthodox maybe 10 years behind Conservative. Okay, right? It was much quicker than that. But, even if both started out differently, it's not really that much difference. Both have gay rabbis, both have transgender and who knows what. They count women, women rabbis, all these things. They're not much different. Practically speaking, maybe, a Reform service is more in English, okay. Right? But practically speaking, not much difference. Now, Rebbe would say not that way. He'd say, even if they are the same, let's say they're exactly the same what they do. Practically speaking, he would say they started off different. How'd they start off different? Reform movement started off, their goal 100% was to uproot Torah. That was their goal. That was their goal. Conservative movement did not start out that way. So my argument was, doesn't matter. The fact is, today, they're more or less the same. Right? They're more or less the same. But to him, that wasn't the case. They're not the same because they started off different. So anyone who associates with either movement, that's pretty bad. But especially with the Reform movement, even if they were brought up that way, parents don't know anything, the grandparents don't know anything, doesn't matter. The fact they associated with such a group is a problem. Right? It's a problem because, again, what's their end goal? How did they, or let's say better, how did they start? They started uprooting Torah. Now, how'd that work out? A lot of people flocked to them. Okay. Many people thought in the 60s and 50s that Orthodoxy was dead. Okay. But how did it work out? Most of the Reform congregations, most of the people there are non-Jews. They're mostly non-Jews. That's just the way it is. So they're now coming back, a little bit to tradition because they realize most of the congregants aren't Jewish. Very good. Yeah. So a conservative movement, it's not that much different. The stats are, I would say, similar. Comes to intermarriage, maybe some more in the Reform movement, some less, whatever, whatever it is. Anyway, bottom line is, where did God say in the Torah I don't have to keep it? If I don't understand it, or it doesn't make sense to me, where did it say that? If it doesn't make sense, most of the Torah doesn't make sense, which actually would be another proof that God must have written it and passed it down. Because if we're going to make up a religion, anybody would make up a religion, what would they do? They'd make it very easy. Very few commandments, very few commands, probably not so much ritual, all these things, right? They make it a lot easier. They make it 10 times easier. So therefore, it would be very easy to say that the way we have it today, even if a lot of it does not make logical sense, which doesn't have to, but you still have to understand it. You still have to keep it to the best of your ability. What's going to happen? What's going to happen? We see that since a lot of these things don't make sense, why would somebody, a committee, whoever, put this together in order that, a lot of it, it doesn't make sense according to, our own logic. It makes sense according to Torah logic. Okay, but it doesn't make sense according to us. A lot of it. So therefore, I could assume, maybe it's a big assumption, but I don't think so. I could assume nobody in their right mind, no committee, no matter how smart they are, would make a religion so complicated. Why do they make it so complicated? They make it very easy. Have half a dozen mitzvahs, 10 mitzvahs, 12 mitzvahs, whatever you want to call it. But all those mitzvahs are very easy to do. If it's very easy to do, you're going to have a lot of people going to sign up. That makes sense. It would absolutely make sense because I don't have to do very much. I don't have to think very much. Very easy. Right? But you look at some of these commands, and you scratch your head. One of the commands is if you see a mother bird hovering over eggs, you shoo away the mother bird and you take the eggs. Now, doesn't that sound cruel? Gemara says you say it's cruel, right? That's heresy. It's a divine decree. Okay. It's a divine decree. And not only that, it's the only mitzvah besides honoring parents that the Torah explicitly says you get long life. i.e., not in this world, in the spiritual world, right? Whatever, whatever that means. That make a whole lot of sense. Well, that's a kosher, same thing. I take meat, that's kosher. I take milk, that's kosher. I put them together through heat, I make it non-kosher. How's that work? Why should that be? Yeah, a lot of things. I mean, I go through a whole laundry list of things, right? Just to show, right, that the Torah must be divine, right? Here, one other example. Yeah, you look at kosher animals, right? It's kosher animals. The Torah says have to have two signs. One is it has split hooves and it chews its cud, right? So anything that has split hooves and chews its cud is going to be kosher. Now, based on that, the Torah says there are certain ones that do one and not the other. Either have split hooves but don't chew its cud, or chew its cud and don't have split hooves. Split hooves, right? You got a camel, that Torah points out. You got certain types of rabbits, a badger, I'm not exactly sure, whatever it is. You have pig, you have other things. Only a handful of things, right? You only have a handful of things. So how did Moses know that? I mean, unless he was Dr. Doodle and played with the animals and, right, he went all over the world and checked that out maybe. But there's another thing. The world is 70% water. So the Torah says, what's the sign of a kosher fish? Sign of a kosher fish is it has scales and fins. If it has scales, it'll have fins. Doesn't have scales, won't have fins. How do you know that? How many, billions of species of fish are there in the world? Imagine what Moshe Rabbeinu would have had to do in order to go around the world, essentially go around the world, hire tens of thousands of people, go to every single lake or wherever, all over, in order to check that out. How would he know that? Impossible to know, right? Even by the other animals that he says these are exceptions, right? Certain rabbits and pig or whatever. What if there were other exceptions? Let's say there are other exceptions Moses didn't mention. Yeah, that would also be good proof that the Torah wouldn't be true. Any of these things. If you found a fish, let's say, you found a fish that had scales but did not have fins, right? Then also that would show that the Torah is true. Now, we're not talking about, genetically modified things. You have fish today that can be a hybrid of a kosher fish and a non-kosher fish, right? You breed them together, and this new creation has scales and fins. Now, there's a problem, right? There's a kashrus issue, and the kashrus issue is anything that comes out from something that is impure, i.e. an impure animal or fish, can't eat it, can't consume it, right? So over here, you have DNA of this fish that's partly not kosher, right? It's partly not kosher. So normally we say whatever comes out of a non-pure fish you can't eat it, right? Maybe you tell me there's a kashrus axiom. The kashrus axiom is zevzeh gorim. Zevzeh gorim means if I have two things causing something, I have two different types of things causing something else. So there are two opinions. Either you tell me it's forbidden or it's permissible. We all, technically speaking, it's permissible, right? So maybe if I put these two together, it comes out, this new species. Maybe I'll say it's okay. It's more, whatever. It's more, a lot more complicated, right? But genetically modified things we're not talking about. You're gonna say, but how would Moshe Rabbeinu know that? We're not talking about that. He was talking about a normal fish. Any normal fish, not modified here, not genetically modified. A normal fish. If it has scales, it has fins. If it has fins, it has scales. That's it. You don't have anything in between. You want to say, but I got the species, whatever. Forget it. It's modified. It wasn't an original species. If it was original species, very good. If it's not original species, then okay. Right? Then I understand. It's modified. It's changed. that's a different thing. So back to the point. The point is that that there's one God that can be proven because of the world of design, right? That's what Abraham did when he came on the scene, the age of 3, the age of 40, or later, right? However old he was, very good. But at the same time, now that it's proven there's one God, forget about all these other religions. Now what's my obligation? If there's a designer, if there's a world of design, by deduction, there means there's a designer. Very good if there's a designer. And same way, I have to serve the designer. Very good. What does the designer tell me to do? Right? What are my obligations? You can tell me again it's not the point to get into all the proofs. But if you tell me there are 80,000 other religions, so you can tell me, how do I know this is true? They're going to say their thing is true, right? Again, we're not going there, but if you want to see, if a person want to go down that road, I would just say one thing, one very general thing, and that is that if you find a flaw in the book, any flaw, whatever it may be, in the book claiming that God said this or God said that or who knows what, you find one flaw, because God doesn't make mistakes. Once you find one flaw, you throw out the whole book. If God forbid there was a flaw in the Torah itself, that's it, you throw it out. You would throw out the whole thing, one flaw. So other books, easy to find flaws, right? Yeah, very easy to find flaws. Yeah, so, that's it. If they make a mistake, God doesn't make mistakes. Right, so that would be proof that, these books have to stand the test of time. And most other so-called religions, what do you have? One person said God came to him, told him to do this, told him to do that, in front of who? Bunch of drunks, a few people, no more than a few people, any of these things. So that's a leap of faith. That you're going to say, Muhammad had this, you had this flight from Mecca to Medina, this and that. So who was there? Who was there who saw it? Any of the miracles JC did. Who was there? How many tens of millions of people were there? Nobody. It's all the same thing. You're going on a leap of faith saying this is what happened. Right? Based on one person's testimony. Right? What does the Torah say? 600,000 men between the ages of 20 and 60, not including women and children. That's 3 million people. That's it. Right? That's in front of a whole nation. And that can pass down generation to generation with all these customs. We by Passover. Right? A mezuzah you put on the door, on a doorpost. So every mezuzah is written in, you got parchment there, talks about what? Exodus from Egypt. One event. Whole evening service, Exodus from Egypt, make Kiddush Friday night, Zecher with Tzias Mitzrayim. Right? We're remembering coming out of Egypt, all these things. Right? One event in history, very good. But that one event solidified who the Jewish people were, made them into a nation. Right? They passed that down. Now, normally a parent wouldn't lie to a child. So, so the grandson says, hey, why are we doing this? Oh, what do you mean? Grandpa was at Mount Sinai. This is what happened. These are the commandments that were given. Right? Because grandpa was there. Now, what about his son? So the son will tell him, the father will tell him, well, your great-grandfather was there at Mount Sinai. And his son will tell him, same thing, until you get to later generations. So you tell me, it's a big game of telephone. Yeah, maybe. But they all heard the same thing. Right? Yeah, maybe got diluted later, whatever, but everyone's a link in that chain. That link in the chain hasn't stopped. Right? So you have one event in history that changed everything. Right? You can say, but that's a leap of faith that it happened. 3 million witnesses or 2 million witnesses is not a leap of faith. Every other so-called religion, this is just the starting point. Every other so-called religion has their base and one person's testimony. One person's testimony in front of a few other people. I think it's a lot different, if you have, testimony of 3 million people or 2 million people, or, as, some Mormons told me, wow, don't you believe, this Book of Mormon, and it was found in the cave, 200 years, John Smith, I said, you ever read, Exodus chapter 19, Exodus chapter 20, 18, 19, 20? 3 million people. Yeah, beat your, 200 years, in your book in a cave. Yeah. So again, you have to look at evidence. You have to evaluate evidence. All right. Yeah. A few questions here. Let me deal with. Somebody asks, are Noahides, should they avoid prophets? Personally find it difficult to understand Rashi commentaries, especially chapters of Yeshayahu. Yeah. Isaiah is hard to go through. Right, no question. A lot of times he changes position and what he what he's talking about. You got to be able to follow the logic. Or you have to be able to know, like, what he's talking about when he, etc. So I would say like this. I would say going through a proper English translation, is good. Everyone has, to have a proper English translation. Go to Chabad.org and go to artscroll.com, get good translations, very good. But I'll tell you the truth, going through it and just reading it is good. Not going to really understand that much what's going on, and the reason is because there are subtle messages he's giving. So if you don't go through the commentaries, right, I'm not saying a non-Jew should do this, but I'm just pointing out, if you don't go to the commentaries, you'll still be lost. You'll be more lost because you'll be able to understand in the language you understand, whatever it is, right? You understand what he's saying. Now, the question is, what does he mean? What is he talking about? What's the context? Yeah. A lot of people, kids today learn, they learn Chumash at a very young age. They learn simple explanation. That's it. Now, one of the reasons they don't learn it, more in depth later is because seemingly they look like contradictions between Tanakh and the Torah. I mean, you have to understand, and obviously it's not a contradiction of what the answer is, but whatever, they're very deep things going on, right? So in your case, what would I suggest? So yeah, Rashi is going to be very, you need someone to teach you, obviously, right? Just, simple explanation, but I would tell you, you'd be more lost without it. Just reading it, you can read the story and it's very hard to go through. Yeah, it's very hard to understand. I'll give an example. You go to the story of David and Bathsheba. I spoke about this a few weeks ago in a Q&A, right? So there's a question, how could David do what he did? Right, you look at Psalm 51, Nathan the prophet chastises him, right? But, obviously the Gemara says, anyone thinks that David sins making a mistake, right? Why are they making a mistake? It looked bad what he did. Okay, well, let's understand. First of all, anyone who went to war, they gave their wife retroactively a bill of divorce. They don't come back, they're divorced, de facto. Yeah. Uriah Hittite, what does he do? He's morid b'malchus, right? He is rebellious against the king. What's the punishment for rebellion against the king? Death. That is the punishment. So he sent him to the front lines. You're going to say it all looked bad because he wanted to take his wife. Very good. But he already had a death sentence on his head. He had a death sentence on his head. So technically, she's not married, right? She's not married to him. And he deserved to die. So since he deserved to die and he's not married to her, so he takes Bathsheba. What did he do wrong? Technically, he didn't do anything wrong. Right? Now, you're going to say, if you look at what is going on, right? This is a very good example. You look at the words. What does it look like? It looks really bad. Right? No question it looks bad. Yeah. And everyone's going to make the claim and say, of course he sinned. Because that's seemingly what the words say, face value. Yeah. Now, technically speaking, she's considered a divorced woman. He can marry her. Right? And what he did to her husband, right? He had it coming. He was morid b'malchus. He was rebellious against the king. So in either case, he didn't do anything wrong. Now, you'll tell me it looks bad. Okay. Maybe it looks bad. Doesn't mean he sinned. right? The Gemara says anyone who said he sinned is making a mistake. Making a mistake. Now, you can tell me it doesn't look good, and that's, but where do you see that from the words? Well, you need oral law to explain this. You don't have oral law, you're lost. You're totally lost over here. You look at, I'll give another example. One of the worst things the Jewish people ever did is sin of the golden calf. Yeah, no question. Right? Absolutely no question. Now, with the sin of the golden calf, right? Sin of the golden calf, what does it look like? Very clearly, what does it look like? Idolatry. Very much looks like idolatry. Now, the obvious question would be, how did the Jewish people fall so far so fast? Because the Torah is not written in chronological order. So when the Torah speaks about the sin of the golden calf, it happened, it happened much earlier. It happened much earlier after the Torah was given. It's just written later. Right? So there's no, it's not what happens in history is not necessarily written in order, so to speak. So if it happened not long after giving to the Torah Mount Sinai, what do I have? I have a major question. The Jewish people, 20% who came out of Egypt, right? 80% died in Egypt. 20% came out of Egypt. They saw the plagues. They saw the miracles in the desert. How in the world could they think this calf came out and, took them out of Egypt? How could they have fallen so fast? Now, the inclination, Mr. S, is something, whatever you want to call him, the Medrash says. Medrash says he showed a picture in heaven of Moshe Rabbeinu on a coffin. So they thought he died. They wanted an intermediary. Very good. Now, what does that sound like? Sounds like idolatry. That's what it sounds like. Now, if you look at the commentaries over there, commentaries go to town. I mean, literally go to town explaining what the verses mean, right? But they go to town explaining that it has nothing to do with idolatry. Wasn't idolatry. But God wanted to wipe out the Jewish people. Very good. It looked bad. No question. No question it looked bad. But to say it was outright idolatry, the obvious question is, right, if they're on such a high level, at that point, when after God gave the Torah, very hard to imagine they fell that far so fast. Very hard to imagine. Yeah. So you can say they were convinced. It was only the mixed multitude. Whatever. That doesn't matter. Right? The point is, even the mixed multitude came out of Egypt. They were converts. They were converts. So they also saw miracles. Right? They also saw miracles in the desert. Very good. So even if it was them, and you can say, oh, they're on a lower level. They didn't interpret things the right way. They this, that, and the other. Okay. I can understand to a point. But to tell me they fell so far, so fast, hard to imagine. The whole book of Numbers is very hard to understand. Right? The story of the spies. Or let's say better, even before you get to the story of the spies. You have the story where they want to go back to Auschwitz. They want to go back to Egypt. Yeah, they missed the fish. They missed the watermelon. What do you mean they missed the watermelon? Don't you remember how bad it was? You got whooped. They worked you to death and all this and all that. But, they're living in the desert. It's very hard. So they missed that. They want meat. But what about the man? What about the man? It didn't taste like it, whatever they wanted it to taste like. But what are they missing? And then you get the story of the spies. Story of the spies. God did all these miracles. Why does he think he's not going to take care of, when they enter the land? Even though these people were like giants, we were like grasshoppers in our eyes, and blah, blah, blah. Well, why can't God destroy them? He destroyed the world power at that time. Egypt, the world power, destroyed. Totally decimated. Right? Physically, right? Took out all their wealth, not to mention the other decimation of the country itself. If God did that, why couldn't he, take care of these people, take care of these nations? And then you got Korah. You got the famous story with Korah. And he wasn't a fool. He came out of Egypt. He held the Aaron, didn't die. Right? He didn't die. So he wasn't a fool. So what happened? How was he going to be jealous and, make fun of Moshe Rabbeinu? Right? Or what? He's really jealous. He wanted to be the high priest. Very good. Moshe Rabbeinu showed favoritism or protections, we would say here. Very good. Yeah. But everything, Moses said by the Be'er Shema Moshe Labor, God spoke to Moshe. So like, what was he thinking? He convinced 250 people, 250 great men with him. And they all got flushed. I mean, there are answers. Not going into them, but at face value, this looks kind of hard. Right? Give one other last example. You got the story of Ruth. Where does Ruth come from? Moab. From my father. Not so modest, right? Lot and his daughters. Through Ruth comes who? 3 generations later? The Messiah. Right? King David himself. And the future Messiah is going to come has to come from the Davidic line, for the Christians and for the Jews. Well, kind of strange, comes from an incestuous relationship. So what's the point? You can see things at face value, you have no understanding. The Torah begs to be understood, right? There are many laws in the Torah. Don't tell me how to keep it either. Just tell me, do this, don't do that. Does this apply? It doesn't apply. Torah doesn't tell me. Torah is very vague. One of the reasons it doesn't tell me, because if you wrote all the explanations, or a majority of the explanations of the Torah, you never finish it. It'd be like a billion pages for what's going on, what's really going on, all that. It'd be very hard. It'd be very hard to go through. You never get through Genesis. That'd be hard enough. But just trying to get through creation. Take you years just to get through it. Right? But you'd never finish. You'd absolutely never finish. Right? So if you don't have commentary, you'll be totally lost. You'll be absolutely lost. Tanakh, is full of cases. Full of cases, what you see at face value, don't understand what's going on. No idea. Right? You see, the confrontation between, David and Goliath or Goliath. Yeah. Who did David come from? Ruth. Who did Goliath come from? Orpah. Yeah. So you see the offspring of Orpah, the offspring of Ruth, battling out many things. So many things. So you need commentary. Now, is it no? Yeah, can't learn, Tanakh you can learn. Right? That's for sure you can learn. I wouldn't learn, you can't learn it in depth like a Jew would, but I would tell you the truth, without commentary, you're lost. You're going to tell me even with Rashi you're lost. Very good. Right? It's hard. It's no question. But man, at face value, how you in the world going to know what Isaiah is talking about, right? If you don't have commentary. He shifts from different topics. He doesn't say the same topic all the time. Right? If you don't follow him well, you're going to be lost. Either way. That's not a good answer, but that's the reality. Someone says, Isaiah 40, God doesn't change, right? Very good. I've heard anti-Semitic Russia, Marusha, very evil person, say that there are 8 genders in the Talmud. Why are there 8 genders? Who's 8? He's talking about, he's probably talking about there are cases where you can have somebody that has both genders. Yeah, it's very uncommon today. Can have both reproductive parts. Right. The question is, you look at it as male or female. Right. I mean, but a lot of these cases don't exist anymore because, even if that would be the case, I know somebody like this, that they told me, as a child, they had both. I think they had both genders. They had both reproductive organs. I don't know exactly how that works. The parents made a decision. Now, the parents made a decision that when this child was growing up, didn't like that decision. They made the child into a boy. Yeah. And this person, for a very long time, they felt they were a girl. But they had both, they had both genders, but they were too young to make that decision. They were very young. So what happened? They changed. Yeah. So in that case, whatever decision was made, let's say in this case, they made the child a male. So that's what the child is. Parents made that decision. Okay. Now, later on, this person felt they didn't identify being a guy. Very good. They didn't identify with being a guy. So they felt they were given the short end of the stick, so to speak. No pun intended. They wanted to be a woman. Now, what's their status? They changed to be a woman. Very good. What's their status? They're a guy, right? Things don't change. Things don't change. There were types, there were types that either, it wasn't clear what they were. Or let's say maybe, one of the reproductive organs was hidden, right? Didn't come out, so to speak. So you have cases like that. You don't have it today, though. Everything's, it just changed. It's not, it's not, we don't have those cases anymore. It's rare if it would happen. Someone told me this, I never heard such a thing today. I'm not saying it can't happen. It's very, very rare, right? If someone's born with both, well, they can't live that way. They were going to be to function that way. But the question would be if they would. If they would, the Gemara brings this up. The Mishna brings this up. Cases like this. But what are they going to do? What today would they do if that was the case? In this case, they make a decision one way or the other. Either make it male or female. Or what happens if you didn't do anything? You got male and female. So what do? The female part's exempt from any positive commands bound by time. The male part's obligated. So what do? What do? So they do exist, right? Or let's say better, they did exist. They don't exist anymore. And even if it would come today, somebody like this is born in such a way, right? They, surgically, they're going to do something about it relatively quick because they can't live with both. They won't be able to function with both. So they're going to make a decision, either make male or female. Right? That's what they're going to do. But essentially today, technically that's true. Right? Obviously, people can, it's a little bit of truth in everything. Right? Technically that's true. It doesn't apply to this. Right? Even if there were, a few more quote unquote genders. But not like we're talking about today. People change it from one to another. It's not the case. Even Adam and Eve, they created back to back. God split that, right? It's very hard to understand according to the verse how that works exactly, right? How to see, in the verses themselves, how that is, right? But it's brought down. They were created back to back. Yeah, they got split. Okay, so what do you do? What do you do? The verse says it came out of her, that Eve came out of his loins, right? So the Gemara goes through it, and explains it, right? But if you look at the verse itself, right, the God created man from a woman from man, right? Took out a rib or whatever it was, his loins, whatever, created woman. When you look at that verse, right, you're not going to say they were back to back. You're telling me, well, that's not a simple explanation. You're right. Right? If you look at it at face value. But if there are other things you don't know about, then whatever. Then, it's going to be explained that way. But there are a lot of things. Right? A lot of things like that. So, but we're not talking about going from a man to a woman or a woman to a man. That we're not talking about. We're talking about, a case where someone who's androgynous, right? The Torah says that both male and female sexual character traits, right? Now, so what would the 8 be? What would the 8 be? You got a zachar, you got a male, the cave is a female. Androgynous is male, female together. Tumtum is ambiguous, can't determine. An islandess is someone that's really, it's like Sarah was an eyewitness, that she didn't have a womb, right, so to speak, right? So again, you can have different things, but what applies, right? Bottom line, what applies today, right? Someone's ambiguous. What do you do? Yeah, right. So these are all questions, that that are dealt with. What is it? right? In this case, let's say like a tumtum. Tumtum means that the genitalia is covered, right? They don't know what it is, right? They don't necessarily know, what it is, right? But again, that's a long way going, and saying, wow, what about LGBTQ? Like, they have a choice. We're not talking about that. You don't know what it is because what do you call it? The genitalia is hidden. So if it's hidden, that's not the same thing as making a choice. That's a big difference, right? This is a good example where you see, this taken totally out of context, right? You got an idiot taking it out of context, right? Meaning that someone's making a choice. They say, I feel I'm in the wrong body. I was given the wrong body. I was given the wrong thing or whatever. Okay, so they want to change. That's not the same as saying you don't know what it is and the genitalia is hiding. I mean, that's a big difference. Or you have both, or potentially you have both. That's a huge difference. Instead of saying I'm changing this way or that way. That you know what you are. You feel, doesn't matter what you feel. You say, I feel I'm in the wrong body. Okay. So what? But you know what you are. It's pretty clear, right? Where, this is biology 101, right? Or 101A. Make it very simple, right? A person's either male or female, born that way. Very good. They want to change. That's their choice. I mean, bad choice, forbidden, but okay. Here we're talking about case either I have both, I have neither, or I'm not sure, right? Sarah got to change her nature because she had a nature, she didn't have a womb, right? She didn't have. So God had to change her nature. Can have that also. Very rare today, right? Extremely rare. But what the person's saying is somewhat accurate. Yeah, but it's totally taken out of context, like everything else they do, right? Like the Messianics do, right? We're not, again, we're talking about either person had both, person had neither, you couldn't tell what it was, right? Either way, it's not saying, oh, so they're one and they change the other. We're not talking about that. That's not the case at all. We're talking about either you for sure know what it was, or you don't know what it was, or you're not sure, or the genitalia are hidden. Okay, that's a different issue, right? This is a very good example of something taken way out of context. Oh, there are 8 genders, but the other ones don't. We're not talking about changing from one to another. The question of whether you know what it is or not, because it's hidden under skin, and then it eventually comes out, or you got to find where it is, but you're not sure what it is. It's not the case today. Anyone changing, they know what they are. Pretty clear, except the case I gave where they had both. Okay, right? But in general, you know what you are. So you change it over. What does that have to do with the other cases? Nothing. Nothing. Someone says swordfish. Okay, very good. What is swordfish? Swordfish is a fish. You take it out of the water, and it sheds its scales, right? It sheds its scales. Very good. Now, does it have to have scales and fins while in the water? Or if I take it out of the water, it doesn't have scales anymore, right? So the conservative movement will say it's an iffy fish. We hold it's not kosher because it has to have scales and fins when it comes out of the water. Yeah, you're not going to kill it inside the water because even when it comes out, it doesn't have scales, right? So we hold it's not kosher. What about a king clip fish? That's the difference of opinion. It comes out of South Africa. What's a king clip fish? King clip means, or this type of fish has scales you can't see. Can't see with the naked eye. If you scrape away the skin, you can see the scales. So that we have a major difference of opinion among rabbinic authorities, later rabbinic authorities, whether it's kosher or not, right? What's the problem? What's the problem? Do scales have to be seen with the naked eye? Are they seen with the naked eye? Now, if they're seen with the naked eye, not a problem. Then we say it's scales. If I don't see them, but I see them under a microscope, or I scrape away and I see them, is that considered like I see them or not? That's the difference of opinion. right? That's the difference of opinion. One opinion will say, the scales are there, you don't see them, but it has scales. The other opinion is you got to be able to see them, not under a microscope, right? So, in that case, we have a difference of opinion. We have a difference of opinion whether you should eat it or not. But swordfish does not, according to that, the scales have to come out of the water. Once the fish comes out of the water, it has no scales. We look at it as if it never had scales, right? That's the case of swordfish. Yeah, let me see some other questions here. Can a non-Jew who's present record a proper Shabbos? Why not? Could, right? Well, the Shabbos don't apply to you, so why not? That wouldn't be a problem. I mean, it should be an authentic service, not a reform or conservative one. But could you do it? Yeah, you definitely could do that. Someone says now genetic tests chromosome Y and it's clear as a man. All right. Yeah. That's something different, right? It's something different, but it's pretty clear. Again, even with these quote unquote other genders today, it's clear there are two. That's it. Yeah. So can someone be born with both genitalia? Yes, possible. Right? Is it common? No. But in either case, one way or another, the parents are going to have to decide which way to go. Make it male or female. Yeah. You had other cases before, right? But again, I haven't checked. I haven't checked the stats, but any of these things, I would think is going to be, it's going to be very rare. It's going to be very, it's going to be very rare. If at all. But the other cases they're talking about are changing from one to another, and it's clear what they are. I think it's pretty clear. What they are. Someone here mentions intricate specifications throughout the Israelites directed craft the tabernacle. Also, indication the Torah cannot be conceived. Yeah, also. Right, but I would say like this: tabernacle was built by people who had no idea whatsoever of how to build anything, and God gave them that information. God helped them, right? No question, gave them that information. He gave the Spirit of God in them. What does that mean? He gave them the ability to understand, how to build and how to do these things. Otherwise, they would have had no clue. Coming out of the desert, what would they know? What would they know about building? Nothing. Someone asks, hidden as in understand and testicle, meaning hidden in the flesh somewhere, you don't see it. Hidden means exactly that. You don't see them, they don't pop up. Right? That you're right, they don't pop up. Right? But surgically, you can, again, you do an x-ray, you'll see them. Right? You'll see that they're there, but you wouldn't know that they were there. Right? You would not know that they were there. So by regular looking, at that area, there's nothing there. So what happened? Where is it? Right? Where is it? It's hidden. Hidden means literally it's under the skin. You don't see it. Right? You don't see it. Yeah. Let me see other questions. So these things, by the way, again, I don't think it's very common at all. At all. Today. Let me just see. I'm just curious. Let me see. I don't know. I have to see what the stats are. Like I said, it's not very common. Right? It's not very common. But if it would be, there are it is discussed, Talmud discusses who they can marry. They marry a man, can marry a woman, can marry both, right, etc. So yeah, it does get complicated. Who they're allowed to be with and not, and what you do. But again, today I would say it's not. I would think it's very common. But I'll have to. I'll have to see. I can't imagine. I can't imagine today it's that common. I'm not saying it can't happen, but you'd have to see what exactly. How you going to determine that and what it is. That is, that's for sure. So, and again, in any of these things, we're talking specifically where someone today makes a conscious choice to change. That is a whole different issue, right? These other cases, you're born. Either you're born with both, you're born with neither, you're born with part, I don't know, whatever it is. They're born that way, right? In these cases, not that way, right? It's not that way. So again, somebody mentions new genetic tests, a chromosome with a Y makes it man. All right, but again, not going by what goes on today. I'm telling you, I'm telling you the bottom line. The person's born that way, right? It's pretty clear whether they're male or female. Yeah, not getting into into all that with genetics. I don't think it matters that much, right? I don't think it matters how we're gonna look at it. Right, but the point is that a lot of these people, if not all of them, they feel uncomfortable in the body they were given. So they want to change. That's a whole different issue. That's a crazy thing. It's a crazy societal thing. If you're telling me, like this woman told me, she was born, with both, and she really wanted to be a man, and she wasn't given a choice, but they made a choice. Even in that case, they made a choice, male or female. Yeah. If a person biologically is a male or female and changed, that's the problem. That is the problem, not where there are doubts. Where there are doubts, a different issue. Where there are doubts, the question is, what are they? What are they considered? Who can they marry? That's a very different issue. So technically, yeah, there are different genders, quote unquote. Today, I don't think it's very common, right? These other genders, but what's going on where people making a conscious choice to go one way or the other, that's a whole different thing. Now, even if they say I was born in the wrong body, very good. So what? What genitalia were you given, male or female? Tell me, male or female. Don't tell me I don't feel comfortable. I don't feel that. I don't care what you feel. I'm not interested in what you feel. How were you born? That's how you're going to determine. And no matter what you do, if you were born that way, male or female, when you change, add parts, take off parts, whatever it is, you don't change. According to the Torah, that never changes. It doesn't change. You take off a male organ, put in a female organ, you're still a male. That doesn't change anything, right? Torah doesn't change anything. So, whatever a person does, they do, but, it doesn't change who they are. So that's a very big difference between being born that way. Either you're born with both, or you're born with neither, or part, or whatever. That's a huge difference. Again, and this is a very good point, and that is that you will have people make this claim. They say, hey, there are all these other genders. Very good. There are all these other genders. But you make a choice. Wasn't a choice of genders, right? Wasn't a choice, either given both or part or whatever. Not that, I'm going to change one way or go the other, right? Not like it is today. They had to make a choice back then what to do and who they were married to, and who they could marry, different things. Okay, there are laws governing this. Very good. Today it's a moot point, but it's a very different thing. It's a very different thing saying I'm in the wrong body, right? And saying that I have to make I can make a choice. I was put in the wrong body. That's, the other way is the body is either this way or that way. right? Or somewhere in between, right? But they're born that way. That's a different issue. Different issue than making a choice. If you're born clear as day as a male or female, that's it, right? That's who you are. You want to change, whatever, we live in a crazy world, right? But you weren't, you weren't born with other things. You made a choice. You made a conscious bad choice. That's what you did. You made a bad choice. You wanted to change. Yeah, but it doesn't change anything. Definitely doesn't change anything. You are who you are. If it's not clear what you are, that's a different issue. That's a very different issue. But this just goes to show that, you look at something and say, you want to say, oh, I want to find proof. I want to find proof for what I believe in. Very good. Is this really good proof? Come on. It's apples and oranges. Oh, that's your opinion. There are two separate things altogether. Trying to connect them makes no sense. It doesn't make any sense. Now, technically, person may be right. Right? According to Torah, there are different genders. Very good. But not in the context of saying it. Right? They're taking it way out of context. Born that way and thinking I want to change are two very different things. Very, very different things. Oh, you're closed-minded. I get people free to. It's not a question of closed-minded or not. Either you are or you're not. You're one way or the other. Or you weren't given one or the other. Or it was hidden or whatever. Whatever it may be. Okay. That's the same as I'm making a choice. I'm making a choice what I identify with. It's not a question of a choice. You were born that way. Right? Now the whole thing by Sarah. Right? That Avram saw that Sarai would not have children, so God changed her nature. He had to change her nature. That's what he did. It was impossible for her to have children. She's one of these categories. Very good. She was one of these categories, but she's born that way. Yeah, but I would think that's a big difference. It's a huge difference. Then to think, I'm going to make a choice? What do you mean? What do you mean? It's not going according to new genetics. You think, Y chromosome means it's a guy. I don't know. Man, I don't think it changed anything by us. It doesn't change anything by the Torah. Right? A person's a male or a female. That's it. You make a choice to be one way or the other. Okay, but you were born a certain way. It's clear you were born a certain way. If you were born under these categories, very good. That's a different issue. And they're not making a conscious choice. What are they doing? They have to figure out what they are. Is it a male? Is it a female? Is it both? Who can they marry? Okay, it was complicated. Right? It wasn't so straightforward. Are they male or female? Or are they both? Good. These are good questions. They're not making a conscious choice. It's not like, oh, I want to change this. I mean, if you give them both or whatever, a very big difference. Very, very big difference. So that just goes to show that, anything and everything can be taken out of context. And that's what Messianics are very good at. And Christians are very good at. Is taking things way out of context. And, I don't have to go into detail, but, there are many things that, logic will prove. Logic, forget about oral law, logic. Give one example, right? Example we always give is Jeremiah chapter 30. It talks about a new covenant. Now, the Torah says very clear, you cannot go against Moses' prophecy. And God says, Moses, my trusted servant, says in front of the entire Jewish people, right? Moses, my trusted servant, whatever he says goes. You cannot contradict what Moses says. So by definition, Jeremiah chapter 30 makes no sense. You have to understand what he means by a new covenant. Okay. But what's he talking about in the entire chapter? Reconnecting to the old covenant. Chastising them why they're not keeping what they should be keeping. That, why call the new covenant? Good question. But by definition and by logic, it cannot be a new covenant. It cannot be we're not chosen anymore. Why not? Because the Torah makes clear you cannot go against the prophecy of Moses. Period. cannot go against it. So it's a new covenant. So that needs explanation. But how can it be? God said, okay, you're not chosen anymore. We're going to make a new covenant with someone else. That doesn't make sense logically. Logically. Yeah. So you have to see things in context. Isaiah 53. People always make this claim, suffering servant, but okay. What about Isaiah 52? What about Isaiah 51? What about Isaiah 50? What's the context? Who's the suffering servant there? Jewish people. Right? Why would I think if for the last 4 chapters it's talking about the Jewish people, the next chapter is going to be talking about someone else? Why would I make that assumption? Because you want to prove your point. You want to say, see, over here it's talking about him. Right? It's talking about JC, and it's a hint, and it's this. What about all the other previous chapters? Who's it talking about? What's it talking about him? Yeah. The suffering servant's talking about the Jewish nation. Pretty clear. Right? I think it's very, very clear. Previous chapters. Right? So they're going to take it out of context. That's what they do. So according to them, it makes sense. They'll give all these hints, but it's, you have to see what it's saying. What in the world is the text saying before that? Right? Go look at the chapter before. Look at the same chapter. What's it talking about? Who's it going on? Right? A lot of times they'll take the most difficult passage and say, oh, it means this, it means that, but they don't know the context. Right? Daniel chapter 9, another example. Right? But you got to go back in history and look at other things and then see it in context. Right? It's very easy to cherry pick. Very, very easy to cherry pick. But what about what's said before and what's said after? That's a problem. It's a huge problem. Right? You got to see for what it says and what it's talking about. Right? And if you don't, and if you don't do that, what happens? What is going to happen if you don't do that? What's going to happen clear as day is that you'll take it out of context. Right? 100%. That's what you do. Right? So things can be clear if you want to see it. If you don't want to see it. Right? If you decide not to see it, okay, it's your choice. Right? A person can be misled. A person can be misguided. I don't think there's any question. Right? You got most of the known world that way. Right? People say, oh, we're misguided and we shouldn't be trusted and this and that. And we have oral law, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Right? Evaluate evidence. Does the evidence make sense? Can I show it? Can I prove it? Can I this? Can I that? That's what you got to do. You got to put up or shut up. Either it makes sense or doesn't make sense. I have proof or I don't have proof. Problem is not looking, most people are not intellectually honest. They'll never be intellectually honest because they want to prove what they think is right. So they'll take every last thing out of context. Say, oh, this is what it means. You can't question. And they leave most people, not only illiterate, but they leave them without being able to ask questions. And Judaism's all about asking questions, right? Judaism's all about asking questions. But some of the hardest things are in Tanakh. Very hard to understand, right? In many ways. I mean, I'm learning Tanakh for years to see what's behind, what's going on, different things. It's mind-boggling. We can't look at things at face value. I tell people, if you want to have a context, get a proper translation, just read it. But getting the context, it's going to take study. Right? We go look at things, as we said, by King David. Looks really bad. Look at Psalm 51. Nathan, demolishes him. But what did he do wrong, technically? So you'll say, if I look at the context, I see what's going on. It looks really bad. Very good. It looks really bad, right? But he wasn't married. And Uriah Hittite deserved to die. So he didn't do anything wrong. However, people make the comparison between, Jonathan and King David is like a homosexual relationship. That's also crazy. The way they look at it in context, they loved each other. Like, come on. I heard, whatever, I'm not going to say who, but, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, but, a person said live on the radio, talking about love of one person to another, made that comparison. made that comparison between Jonathan and King David. I mean, it's ludicrous. It's ludicrous. They had a relationship based on, have mutual respect and all that, but not love in the sense of love between man and woman. That was between them. That's again, that's looking at things at face value. But again, that's like saying, you're gonna look at the king of the Jewish people, the future Messiah, is a homosexual. I mean, come on, right? The problem is how we look at it. We have no idea. And there are people, there are people that are, going to say, oh, this means this and this means that, and something else means something else. Yeah, very good, but they don't know what they're looking at. And when you don't know what you're looking at, you run into problems, right? You seriously run into problems. So, Tanakh is a hard thing to learn. Now, again, would I say that, Noahides can't learn Tanakh? No. You have to learn from someone who knows, what's going on. All right. Tanakh is a hard thing to learn, right? It's a hard thing to learn, right? I'll give one example. In Samuel 1, chapter 15 talks about that King Saul has to get rid of all of Amalek. Right? We spoke about this before. All of Amalek, very good. So that being the case, it says, men, women, and children, and their animals, right? And their animals. Why their animals? Why their animals have to be killed? So Rashi there says because they were able to do witchcraft. And because they're able to do witchcraft, what they do? They can turn themselves into animals. People can turn themselves into animals. So since people can turn themselves into animals, God says, you got to kill everybody. But you say the animals didn't do anything wrong. They're programmed DNA, very good, right? So the ones that they could use sorcery in order to do that, guess what? So they had to kill them also. Had to wipe them out also. But again, Rashi brings that down very clear. That's what they could do. Now, if you didn't know that, you would ask the question, okay, what the animals do? Animals didn't do anything wrong. Very good. Right? Very good. So it says, Hashem says his yoke is light. Yeah. Torah is compared to light. They are mitzvah v'torah or. They are mitzvahs compared to a candle compared to Torah compared to light. Right? But you have to be able to take in the light. First has to be a vessel. Right? Person for sure, has to be a vessel to be able to do that. If not, you won't be able to take it in. Right? How much, if you took in direct light, forget it, right? We'd all be dead. Right? Taking in God's direct light would kill us when it's too big of an experience. That's why a lot of people on Mount Sinai, exactly that happened. They died, came back to life, right? Died, came back to life. The first of the 2 commandments, or all of the 10 commandments. And then Moses had to give it over because it was too great an experience. It was too great of an experience, for them. So again, things have to be properly understood. If they're not properly understood, what happens? There are misconceptions. Now sometimes, we're going to say, God said it, we do it, and that's it. You have to understand what we're doing. That's true. We always have to understand to the best of our ability. But bottom line, there's so many things when it comes to Torah and it comes to, Tanakh in general, very hard to figure out on your own. Right? And, we have to understand to the best of our ability. Okay. Yeah. But some of the most confusing things, non-Jews without any sense of direction or how to look at it or whatever are going to take it out of context. Because they, it must mean this. Oh, it must mean that. Again, The example of the golden calf, you look at all the verses. What are you going to tell me? Idolatry. Yeah, that's the way it looks. You see what the commentaries do? You can say, oh, maybe they're trying to protect the Jewish people, this and that. It was a severe punishment. Okay. Yeah, it was a severe punishment. Right? But you have to ask the question, how can they fall so fast, so quickly? You can say, well, the human is that, but where they came from? This is the greatest generation in the history of man. You want to say that, they missed the fish? They missed the fish in Egypt? They didn't think God could take care of business with, people in the land? For hard to understand. Right? And Korach, jealous of Moses and Aaron, come on. He survived with the jealous of. Jealousy can take a person out of this world, right? We're going to see that. One day I get there, right? Well, one day I get there. Someone here mentioned, meaning that, the path can be hard and humbling, yeah. Yeah, but, I told someone that, they thought, they know the Torah backwards and forwards. They asked them a bunch of questions. I showed them, you basically have to start from scratch because all the knowledge you have is backwards, right? It's humbling, right? 100%. I know how to read Hebrew. I started learning. That's also very humbling, extremely humbling. Yeah, and it can be hard because we want to go on the right path. We want to do the right thing, and we're limited knowledge, right? We're limited knowledge. Yeah. Any other questions? All right, I'm going to stop here. I do this every Saturday, 2 o'clock Eastern time, 9 o'clock Israel time. Probably going to start later, maybe half an hour later soon as it gets later. But anyone has any questions, find me on Facebook at Chaim Kaufman, Beyond Orthodox Conversion to Judaism, orthodoxconversion.com, Beyond Orthodox Conversion to Judaism on YouTube. There I got videos on Q&As, ethics of our fathers, book of Leviticus. You want to send me an email, rabbichaimkaufman@gmail.com, RBBICHAIMCOFFMAN @gmail.com, whichever good. Middle of the day, beginning of the day, end of the day.